Hello, and welcome back to Eric Likes Animals podcast, the podcast that talks about current environmental news stories, plus, of course, the main course, a featured species every episode. So, if this is your first time, welcome. And if this is your second or who knows, 42nd time, welcome back and thanks for sticking with me on this crazy journey. Anyway, moving forward on to our first part of our top environmental news stories I have for you guys this time around. The UK is really, honestly, just on fire right now with bringing back species that have either been pushed out of the UK or are just on the brink. So far, we've talked about bison, beavers that have been released, and all the successes that they have had with bringing them back to the UK countryside. Well, now they're moving on to one of the top predators in Scotland, the Scottish wildcats. So, a license has been approved for release of captive bred Scottish wildcats in one of the UK's largest parks. The first phase of this release is scheduled for June in a undisclosed location somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. This will be the first translocation conservation project for a wildcat in Britain and hopefully will lead to 20 cats being released yearly. Now, there are already some Scottish wildcats already in this area, so you know it's an ideal habitat, but the population trend for these wild Scottish cats is still under threat. And this release program will give the population kind of that extra boost or shot of energy to kind of bring them back on track. Wildcats are an important part of the ecosystem there and helps balance out the population of creatures that are its prey. For example, rodents, so they don't overpopulate and wipe out a number of plants and outcompete other important animals, because it's all about balance, and the Scottish wildcats are the answer. A number of the project leaders talked about how this is a great step forward, but they are not over all the hurdles. They still need community, which include farmers, landowners, and of course, domestic cat owners on board, and have them all take the small steps to ensure that their actions don't end up hurting all these Scottish wildcats that they're trying to release. Luckily, we have already heard from one of these so-called groups, the Farming Union of Scotland, saying that the approval of the license for the Scottish wildcat was fantastic news. I mean, it sort of makes sense, right? Cats eat and help control animals that would love to snack on all the yummy food the farmers are trying to grow. You would think that the farmers would be pretty excited to see these guys coming back. Next up, AI, possibly the thing that will enslave all humanity, but for now is helping save one of the rarest primates in the world. The Hainan gibbon may be one of the most endangered primates in the world, with the numbers being thought of only 35 to 36 individuals currently in the wild, which you may find surprising is actually a huge increase from 1970, where they only thought 7 to 8 individuals were actually left. Being primates, they invest long term, just like we do in childcare and rearing. So, normally having one kid spend a couple years with them so that they can kind of show them the ropes and how to be a gibbon before they would have another kid. So, high end gibbons do not recover very fast, even if you stop whatever is hurting the population in the first place. Now, you may be thinking, where does our future overlord's AI come into play? Well, the Chinese government, along with some other help from major tech companies, have been developing new technology to help monitor these animals in the least intrusive way possible. Because constantly flying drones over the forest or playing gibbon calls to see which gibbons would respond and then record how many calls you heard is actually kind of a little bit disturbing for the gibbons because, well, you're making them think that there's other gibbons around. So, being as rare as they are, the Chinese government really wanted to be as hands-off and as remote as they could. So, on to audio recordings and infrared cameras, which, yes, is still not exactly AI. But what is AI is the fact that Zoological Society of London collected 6 months of research audio and gave that information to, sorry, probably going to mess up this guy's name, Defark, sorry. Anyway, a junior research chair at the African Institute of Mathematical Science so that he could actually train an AI software system to be able to ID the gibbon's calls from all others in these audios. This is so that if you had to constantly survey an area with animals through audio, for example, the software could ID when the gibbons are near, what area, and record things like how many different calls, locations, and of course, setting the audio aside so the actual researchers then can comb through it themselves instead of spending years going through just a couple months of audio data to see if anything actually happened. The AI can make it instant. Now, once again, sorry for the name mess up. Darfork said teaching the AI was like teaching a child, like showing him a picture of a cat and saying, well, this is a cat. Now you know. And showing it, this is a dog. This is a dog. Now you know. So, same kind of logic in teaching is how he taught him of this is the sound of the gibbon, just so you know. So it learned so well that it was actually able to ID 80% of all the audio recordings that did have the gibbon calls in it. And a more recent discussion of the technology is that it was even added the ability to have infrared video surveillance added in. And where this video surveillance was, it's normally foggy conditions, and the color of the gibbon's fur are not supposed to be very visible. It's helping them blend into the environment. So a lot of scientists actually missed the pictures that did actually have gibbons in them. But now, thanks to the AI, they are missing far less, if not any pictures. They also, as well as adding new things on teaching the AI that gibbons don't call at night, for example. So it's making the AI actually way more efficient at learning the video surveillance and as well as the combination of the audio recognition. It is now actually able to identify the gibbons up to 89.2% of the time based on the audio and video surveillance, which, come on, if I got a grade like that in school, that would be a big win in my book. So yeah, that's pretty good for the team. Now, the team also made some comments about how they want to keep expanding the AI capabilities, not to take over the world, but possibly to get a point where it can ID unique voices of each gibbon. Being able for the AI to actually figure out how many individuals there are and how they move through the forest just way more accurately than us humans ever could. But please don't tell the AI I said that. Don't want him to get a big, well, computer head? I don't know. Anyway. Then lastly, sometimes the best form of conservation available to us is to just eat it. And it's for conservation, so I guess we all should. The Mediterranean Sea has more than 750 exotic species that are just taking over these pristine waters, from things like lionfish to the Atlantic blue crabs. Many of these species were most likely dumped into the waters from possibly people having them in aquariums and who no longer want them and thinking, heck, the ocean and the sea are all connected. What's the harm? The answer is it's a big harm. These invasive animals are outcompeting the individuals that are supposed to be there and changing the environmental landscape of the Mediterranean Sea. Many of these creatures, like the Atlantic blue crab, yes, if it wanted to, I guess could swim across the Atlantic and accidentally end up in the Mediterranean Sea. But when you add in the vast ocean and all the different ocean conditions, that would be kind of like 1 in a billion chance that one of these crabs would get there, and an even bigger chance if two would be able to get there to then breed. So more unlikely than likely, even though it is all connected, doesn't mean, however, just everyone goes anywhere in the water. Okay, it's all different habitats. They can't just go. So anyway, not great that these guys are in the Mediterranean Sea. And it's super not great that there's 750 different species that are there that are not supposed to be there because holy crap, that's a lot. But what is one fish's extinction threat may be how we can actually save the lives of all the native fish that call the Mediterranean home. Because if there is only one thing that we humans know how to do, it is to devastate a population of animals. Lionfish are actually fairly invasive in a number of locations due to the aquarium trade and people just ditching them into whatever water source is nearby. And one of these so-called countries had a great idea of how to control them by eating them. In Cozumel, Mexico, the lionfish is a very aggressive venomous fish, which was wreaking havoc on the waters. So a fishers cooperative decided they were not going to let this fish just devastate these waters lying down, decided to target and purposely sell Lionfish. Lionfish, when prepared, are actually very delicious, and with them being invasive, they had no season, and the fishermen could take as much as they wanted because, well, we wanted them all gone. Please take the lionfish. And this means making money for the fishermen, giving the native fish a break during this stressful time of lionfish invasion, and of course, taking out one of the actual problems, the lionfish. So, scientists stated that in the 3 years' time, they saw a 60% decrease in lionfish population, which is a lot for an invasive species. Because when they're taking over, they're normally just exploding with numbers. And to see any sort of decrease, let alone a 60% decrease, is a huge win. So, Mediterranean restaurant owners, like Michelin star restaurant owners, are actually looking to this. And they are making the same kind of approach. Dealing with a lot of invasive species, they've decided to make a lot of delicious invasive species inspired creations, creating dishes that are not only delights for the guests, but also involve using invasive lionfish or the invasive Atlantic blue crab while helping out the environment. Taking the one thing we humans sure can do is eat and take too much from the environment, but putting it into good use. Now, conservation scientists do warn that we should be careful with these type of ways to collect, because in the end, this may cause more harm than good. For example, spearfishing lionfish is a much more eco-friendly method than nets, since the diver spearfishing can make sure that the only thing that they are affecting is the invasive species, where the net just sort of grabs whatever gets in the way and can cause harm or damage to the ocean and creatures who don't mean to be caught up in the net. Also, not every creature, of course, is delicious enough to make it on the menu, so still other methods need to be used. But hey, out of all the different methods out there, eating is definitely one that is more fun for people and is a little easier for people to get behind. So, for now, I guess for conservation, let's eat. And that is your environment news. Moving on to the featured species today, I wish to talk to you guys about an amazing species of snake that calls home to the waters of the coastal Southeast Asia. A species that, even if you were actually purposely looking for it and looking directly at it, you may not even realize you're looking at it because it is a master of camouflage, and it is none other than the tentacled snake. Now, the tentacled snake, like I said, calls home to coastal Southeast Asia region found in both freshwater and brackish waters in things like streams, ditches, rice paddies, basically anywhere that has very slow moving water habitats. The countries specifically they can be found in is Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia. Now, the tentacled snake can reach an average length of about 19.6 inches or about 50 centimeters and can live for about 20 years. The tentacled snake is almost completely aquatic and pretty much helpless and kind of pathetic looking on land, and would only ever really leave the water if it was for the most extreme conditions. In fact, the act of their source of water drying out completely is not enough for them to move. Tentacled snakes will be found buried down in the mud of dried up streams and other water sources during the dry season, waiting for the days of rain to come back and once again them emerge from their muddy hideaways. Now, as I said, the snake is kind of the king of camouflage. Its head and body are extremely flat, and its color varies from light brown with some dark stripes to dark gray stripes with a little brown molting along. This color and pattern can resemble a twig or a branch and is kind of supposed to look like it's water-soaked bark. The scales on the snake are keeled and feel rough like sandpaper to kind of further the look of kind of rough bark or sticks in a wet environment. In fact, if a potential predator, which can include a wide variety of things like larger reptiles like snakes or crocs to even larger fish, were to get close enough to the tentacled snake, it would start actually stretching out and become extremely rigid to make sure they can truly sell their performance of being a stick. Now, they will take on this performance so much so that they will stay rigid even if brought out of the water, never breaking away from its performance of I am just a water-soaked stick, because honestly, What animal is just out there looking for a stick, except maybe a dog? But for the most part, yeah, they're looking for a meal. And if it's just a stick, they're going to leave it alone because the snake just doesn't move. And speaking of moving, they rarely do. They spend their days pretty much motionless in the water, in some vegetation or sticks. In fact, they move so little that algae will actually grow over them, which will actually help even more with the waterlogged kind of stick look. Now, they normally hold on to a piece of vegetation or stick with their prehensile tail to kind of anchor them down and help them stretch out in stick fashion. Now, you may be wondering to yourself, how can they detect the animals in the water, especially to have enough time to stiffen up and become a stick real quick? Because if they were to wait until they just simply saw the predator, there's a good chance the predator would see them at the same time and see them going into their stick performance and not be fooled. Well, that's where the tentacle part of their name comes from. Tentacled snakes have these two tentacle appendages that are kind of on their snout, and for the most part, everything we know about the purpose of them is kind of flippy floppy. But for the one part is we do know that it is used for helping sense where animals are in the water. It's kind of an extra sense of touch for them to be able to feel the movement of the water, which is good since using their nostrils underwater, one of the senses other animals may use to know if predators are near, are normally closed in the water due to the water pouring in on them, because they actually have these specialized muscles that will completely shut out any water from going into their nose. So, obviously, if their nose is closed, that doesn't really help with smelling or detecting things. So, hence the tentacles on their face. But since they can't breathe underwater as well, those noses still serve a purpose. Tentacle snakes can hold their breath for about 30 minutes, but after all that time, they will actually start to slowly approach the water's surface to take a breath through their noses. And their noses are specially positioned at the top in a way that it's at the tip of their snout and is able to just break the surface of the water in a way that it isn't too disturbing and it doesn't give away their position to the predators that may lurk above and, of course, below, leaving really just the tentacles and, of course, the eyes to help them spot the predators and possibly yummy prey in their watery environment. Now, the yummy snacks the tentacle snakes go after are normally things like frogs, crabs, but mainly fish. Now, another thought of those tentacles may be to help actually attract fish and other prey items who would then investigate them on a stick thinking that it could be food. But the tentacle snake doesn't always like to leave it up to chance. In fact, the tentacle snake does something that I can best describe is a water slap, which I know sounds like a Pokemon move, but let me explain. For instance, say there's a fish that's swimming near the tentacled snake. Well, the snake does this little bump movement with its body, and from this bump movement, it actually causes a little wave that normally then kind of corrals or pushes the fish toward the tentacle snake's mouth. Like I said, kind of a wave slap. Now, this movement is so quick, you actually need a high speed camera to slow it down to even catch a glimpse of this. In fact, when people first saw these fish checking out the tentacle snake and then all of a sudden ending up right in their mouth as if the snake had like super mind powers and brought them right to their face, they didn't even see this movement. That's how quick it was, and thought that somehow maybe it was the tentacles or maybe they had super mind powers, like I said, over these fish, telling them, come in my mouth, it's time for you to get eaten. But thanks to cameras, we now know there's this little wave slap. And once that fish is in its mouth, it still has some more tricks up its sleeve. For tentacle snakes are what are called rear fanged, meaning they have specialized fangs found in the back of their mouth versus kind of the front, like most people would think venomous snakes would have, with kind of two big fangs in the front. No, their fangs are way in the back. Unless you're a fish or something that they would be hunting, the venom also is not that powerful and really won't hurt you because it helps stun their prey so that they can be able to eat it and those grew fangs once again found very deep back in their mouths. So unless you're getting already partially eaten by them, you wouldn't even come into contact with them. In fact, the venom of these snakes is actually pretty cool because a lot of them are specialized. So they found that different types of tentacle snakes have been known to have specialized venom for each other specialized prey found in the different regions that tentacle snakes call home. Not much is known about the breeding behaviors of tentacle snakes in the wild, but I can tell you some things. For instance, the females are probably not giving birth when they have no water in their pools. They need the water. So that's something. But what we do know is, for instance, obviously the male and female will mate. Since they don't leave the water, eggs don't really work in this fashion. So females actually are giving birth to live young. Yes, many reptiles do actually give birth to live young. That is not a mammal thing. And when it comes to tentacled snakes, that means that their kids are pretty much ready to go right away. Perfect and completely ready for their aquatic world. Now, the female will give birth to about 5 to 13 young, and as I said, they're pretty much ready to go, and they will start eating tiny fish when they first emerge. And when they normally first emerge, they're around 7 inches, but in a fairly short time, they will start growing, sometimes doubling in size in just a couple months, and normally will be sexually mature in 2 to 3 years. As for their conservation status, the IUCN Red List has the tentacle snake listed as least concerned population trend unknown. So it means that they're doing pretty good. And most likely, the two major reasons why the population trend is unknown is A, they are doing okay. So resources are most likely going to other animals that they know are doing bad. And well, there's only so many people out there doing these studies. And B, they have great camouflage. And that is not very easy then for us people to find and track and do good population studies sometimes. But don't worry, I'm not skipping over the conservation part. We will still talk about conservation with them because, like I feel like I've always said many times through this podcast, it can very quickly swing the other way. And it's important to know the possible threats ahead so that we're not thrown off guard if the day did come where all of a sudden they were endangered and we're like, oh gosh, what could the major threats be? And right now, looking at it, there are probably three major problems that could actually in the future become major threats for the species as a whole. First up, the illegal pet trade, taking them out of the wild and selling them as pets around the world. Now, this is a species that has been bred in captivity, so first up, not necessary. And of course, not the easiest species to work with because, yes, they are unique and cool looking animals, which normally means they have very unique needs. Secondly, pretty much everywhere in the world right now, it seems like we are watching different viruses, bacteria, or fungus cause a number of different problems for a number of wild animals, especially reptiles and amphibians. And right now, there is some fungus causing some issues in this region for a number of reptiles, and something in an aquatic environment like a tentacled snake really should keep an eye on because, as we've seen time and time again, it's things like that can leave a species completely devastated in a short time. Look at chytrid fungus with amphibians in Central and South America. There were some amphibians down there that had only months when it got in. And then lastly, agriculture, more specifically rice paddy fields, which is a bit of a gray area because the rice paddy fields, however, is not completely cut and dry because they have been found and seem to actually do fairly fine living in the number of different rice paddy fields. But most of these fields are made in the natural habitats of these animals in the first place because the fields are, well, man-made wetlands. And the easiest place to make a man-made wetland is in a place where there's already a wetland, aka where the tentacle snakes already are living. So it really, in the end, comes down to how each field is run. Now, is our rice field better than the environment that was supposed to be there? No. But unlike many other forms of agriculture, rice paddies are not just kind of like empty wastelands. Because with the use of chemicals trapping and killing wildlife or filtering out everything except for water to come in from the creeks or streams, yes, then a rice field can be a vast wasteland. But there are a number of them that have a ton of different animals living in these rice paddy fields, like the tentacles of snakes. So, yeah, rice fields, definitely sort of a gray area there. Is it better than the environment? No, but it is not as damaging as some other agricultural forms. So, what can we do to make sure none of these things never become major issues that could devastate our little friend, the tentacled snake? Well, pet trade, I would honestly suggest if you do want a snake, pick a much easier one than a tentacled snake in the first part. Don't create a need for them in the first place. But if you're going to get one at the very least, do your research. Make sure you know where no matter what, the pet that you're getting is not causing harm for the environment or the species. Because in the end, if you really do love that species, you would want it to thrive. As for the fungus, scientists are monitoring and trying to figure out solutions like medicine to help treat animals and to stop spreads of all the different fungus and viruses affecting wild animals around the world. As for us humans, and you specifically, something to keep in mind is not being the cause of the spread. Examples is if you go hiking, say on a designated path, stay on the designated path. And for whatever reason, if you have to walk through water areas, it's good to clean and disinfect your shoes before going to another location to prevent the spread of possible disease from one place to another via your shoe, even if it's a park across the street. I mean, I know that might be a little crazy if you're just happening to walk there anyway. I get it. You don't have to disinfect then. But if you have a chance, if you go hiking one day, it's just good to get in the habit of disinfecting your shoes every time you're done hiking. That way, if you go to a different location, you're not possibly bringing something with you. And I know many of us are not traveling around the world, hiking in different swamps around the world, but this is something important just in our own backyard. However, if you are someone that happens to be listening that does hike around all the world, get completely different shoes. I know that people have lucky hiking shoes and all that, but the best way to make sure that things don't spread is to get specific hiking shoes if you're going to a different country to hike. All right. This is going to help stop a lot of disease and fungus spreading from all different locations, because a lot of the stuff that has been spread, they have picked from people that had specific shoes or gear that came from one country to another country and then stepped into the new environment, and boom, that's all it took. So yeah, help stop the spread and help save our scaly and all our other friends out there. Clean your shoes. Then lastly, the rice fields. Like I said, it's already sort of a gray area, but keeping it more eco-friendly is the goal. So no chemicals, allow animals to come in and treat it like an actual wetlands, just one that humans kind of help along a little. So possibly adding patches of other plants, so it's not just rows and rows and rows of rice, which we've talked about before. That's kind of the big devastators, at least on land. A lot of times is having just one plant, and also really letting kind of the emergence of wilderness and farming is just going to be more beneficial in the long run. I know. First off, you have less of a field if you let more wildlife in and let other plants in. But the benefit of allowing more nutrients to come in for plants, animals to come in to keep pests down, since most farms actually prevent only the beneficial animals most of the time from getting in and letting the pet species then run a riot with no checks on them, is kind of the big thing when conservationists talk about kind of this agricultural conservation farming method. Helps the animals, helps us, better food, and keeps all things hunky-dory for animals like our good friend, the tentacle snake. And that's our show. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the tentacled snake. As always, make sure to check me out on my social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, or TikTok. And if you ever want to just ask any questions or just want to reach out, please feel free to reach out to me at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com. Links and information are down below in the episode footer. Once again, thank you guys for listening again. Hope you enjoyed yourself. And as always, I'll see you next time.